People in Congress, some of them are just not interested in governing. They like to use Congress as though it's a reality TV show. Since then, we've had this divided government. GOP winning one chamber, Democrats winning another. And when you have to pass a law through both chambers and get a presidential signature, it just makes it a lot harder.
When Americans go to the polls in November, they will also be choosing members of Congress. And if the presidency seems to have problems, Congress, well, is practically paralyzed. Let's explain what we're talking about. The U.S. Congress consists of two chambers, both of them nearly tied between Republicans and Democrats. The House of Representatives has a very small Republican majority, but those Republicans are essentially at war with each other. And so that means they don't work like a majority ought to. In the Senate, a different story. The Democrats and their allies have a tiny majority there, but the Senate has 100 seats. That means 100 votes, and according to its rules, you need more than a majority. You need 60 votes to get just about anything important done. So the Senate doesn't do a whole lot. That's the Congress right now. Now, you may think that's not really a problem. The president can govern. And in fact, the president does govern up to a point. The president cannot adopt laws under the U.S. Constitution. That's something only Congress can do. But maybe more important, the president can't spend money. He can't spend a penny. Hiring people, paying their salaries, buying cement for roads, buying guns for soldiers. He can't do anything in the business of governing without money, and he has no right to any money unless Congress gives it to him, which is why the United States government virtually is in crisis every time the U.S. Congress has trouble passing a budget, and that's several times a year. It may seem to you like a crazy way to run a big and important country, and maybe it is. Share your thoughts in the comment box. We'd love to hear from you. In the meantime, Congress is crippled. Kevin Kosar watches all of this unfold, and let me ask you, am I overstating things? How effective do you think the U.S. Congress is in actually doing the jobs the Constitution, the people, expect of it?
Well, thanks for having me on. And it's not for nothing that a few years ago, my name appeared on a book as a co-editor, and the title was Congress Overwhelmed. This is an institution that's just swamped with its responsibilities. It's got way too much to do, and a lot of balls are getting dropped. And one of the most important ones is, yes, passing a budget so that the federal government can be funded to carry out the law. And it's struggling terribly to do that.
Why is this happening?
Part of the problem is the people. You have people in Congress who, some of them are just not interested in governing. They like to use Congress as though it's a reality TV show, and they act up for the cameras and they fundraise and they polish their brand with ultimately an eye towards becoming a high-paid media person or having their own podcast or doing something like that down the road. Then you have, as you noted, the tight partisan split. Democrats and Republicans are barely in charge of each of the chambers, and they are trying to win it all this November. And so that means they don't want to cooperate with the other side on the most important issues like immigration. They'll cut bargains on small stuff that Americans are not paying attention to for the most part. But on the big deals, they don't want to work together.
Has it always been like this?
No, it's not always been like this. I mean, part of what we are seeing is new because divided government is relatively new. There was a period of time in the United States where Democrats controlled the House of Representatives and the Senate for about 40 straight years. I was from late 40s to the early 80s. But since then, we've had this divided government with GOP winning one chamber, Democrats winning another, or perhaps one party has both chambers of Congress, but the other party wins the presidency. And when you have to pass a law through both chambers and get a presidential signature, it just makes it a lot harder due to the partisan jockeying.
So what do they actually do when they meet? I mean, what do they fill their days with?
Well, their days, that's an interesting question, because their days are not all spent here in Washington, D.C. Unlike your typical worker who has to report on the job 5 days per week, perhaps, maybe even more, Members of Congress tend to fly in late Monday, and they start work in the chambers on Tuesday, and then come Thursday night, they wrap up business and fly home. Now, it's not because they're lazy, it's because they're afraid of being attacked by their opponents as being out of touch with their home state and their home district. So members of Congress spend a ridiculous amount of time flying back and forth to Washington, D.C., and only spending part-time in a chamber where they should be full-time. So that's one issue.
Well, while they're flying around, while they're pretending to be in a reality TV show, what about the business of governing the country? How many important things don't get done? How many problems drag on that could be resolved with a bit more attention and a bit more consensus?
Well, yeah, the first thing they're going to have to do is to have more time in session. That means when they're officially in the Capitol and able to do things like pass laws. The current Congress has passed only about 64 laws over a year and a half. Part of that's the schedule. Part of that is because they can't agree with one another on certain issues. They're also going to have to pare back their workload at some point in time. Right now, we have about 180 executive branch agencies. So Congress needs to oversee every one of them to make sure there's no mischief going on, or make sure that they're actually carrying out the policy that was enacted in law. But they also have to fund each and every one of these. And it's created this really huge workload upon them. And so one thing they should certainly think about doing is a little more prioritizing, perhaps. Maybe a little consolidation of some of the activities, because right now they're just beyond bandwidth.
So what is the impact on the United States, a big, complicated country with enormous problems to solve and enormous potential to do things when it doesn't have to solve problems?
Yeah, we've got this kind of weird spectacle occurring where there are two Congresses at operation. There's the one Congress that most of us are familiar with. You just turn on the news and you shake your head in dismay at the people yelling at each other, the rabid partisanship, things not getting done. And then there's this other Congress that's often called the secret Congress, where legislators are beavering away on important but really boring issues, quite frankly. And when you look at the 64 laws that have been passed this year, some of those are silly things like renaming post offices. But there's a lot of substantive stuff there. But it's not the sort of stuff that either party can run on in an election. They can't demonize one another. And so it often doesn't get a whole lot of media attention, and people don't know what's happening.
Do members of Congress know that there's a problem?
Oh, to a person. I don't think I've ever met a member of Congress who said, yeah, this place is running great. No, they're dismayed. And I started working directly as a nonpartisan civil servant back in 2003. And I was in that role for 11 years. And there was a collective action problem happening there, meaning everybody was miserable, but they kept looking at each other like, so who's going to do something about it? Nobody was taking action. Thankfully, in the last 5 or 6 years, we've had members stepping forward, and we've had some efforts at reform. They created a select committee on the modernization of Congress in the House of Representatives. Later, that became an official subcommittee working away. And they're trying to make things better. They're trying to make life on Capitol Hill better for all the staff who support them. But they've got so much work to do.
Who profits from this? I mean, it sounds like it's just a disaster for the U.S. government, but is the Democratic Party, is the Republican Party actually better off when Congress is this dysfunctional?
No, I'm not sure anybody is better off. I mean, each of the parties want to win. And you win, first and foremost, by making the other side look awful.
Well, let me push you on this, and please tell me where I'm wrong on it. Democrats tend to be people who believe in government, who want to use taxes and government intervention to change the country and make it a better place. Republicans tend to mistrust government, and they don't want taxes to be used to try and change things unless they're absolutely necessary, and they don't believe the government is capable of making the country a dramatically better place. Does a dysfunctional Congress suggest to people that the Republicans are right?
I'm not sure about that because ultimately the issues that people confront in life are real. And whatever the politics are, the issues aren't going away. Take, for example, the issue of Americans getting addicted to that horrible drug trank, which turns them into zombies. I mean, it's worse than a lot of the other opiates out there that people get hooked on. That's hitting communities all over the country, whether they're Republican, Democrat communities, urban, rural, that stuff is everywhere. And thankfully, members of Congress pulled together and in a bipartisan fashion passed a law that Mr. Biden signed, which is going to up federal research on trank in hopes of trying to getting a better idea of the possible ways to attack this menace. That's a positive example of the sort of things that Congress can respond to when neither side sees an advantage of kind of running on it as an issue to attack the other side, but as something that they can each do for the sake of the public good.
Let me ask something, and people listening to this conversation may have a thought about this, but how much is your faith in the U.S. government shaken when you hear things like this? The whole world looks to the United States for all kinds of reasons. The whole world has to, for better or worse, feel the effects or endure the effects of decisions that are made in Washington by the president, but also by the Congress. How much is the faith of the American people shaken by the mess that the Congress has become?
Yeah, certainly the public is not pleased with Congress. In part, Congress gets a little bit of bad PR, not enough good news gets reported, but their disasters are on Capitol Hill are definitely affecting Americans' moods. Something like only 15% of Americans think that Congress is working well. And I presume those must be family members related to people who work there. Yeah, certainly the spectacle of January 6th, where you had people storming the Capitol, that out-of-control situation, which had never occurred before, that's going to rattle people's confidence. I myself, am I worried? A little bit, but on the other hand, we've had some very tumultuous political periods in the past. I think people forget in the late 60s, early 70s. I mean, there were radical groups setting bombs trying to blow up the Pentagon. Before that, we had an instance where Puerto Rican nationalists went into Congress and shot the place up. You can go back as far as the 1890s where, violence was endemic. And before that, you had congressmen clobbering each other on the floor. We've had periods of political assassinations. There's been bad times in the past and the republic has held. So I'm not going to sit back and hope things get better. I'm going to try to help Congress and the governance system improve here. But I'm not losing sleep over it. Not yet.
Okay, still, I'm asking people who are watching, if you have a thought, if your faith is shaken, or if your faith in the United States is strong, given what it's historically done, share those thoughts with us in the comment box. One last question for you, Kevin Kosar. Voters are going to go to the polls in November. Is the election likely to change any of this, make any of it better?
Probably not. More than likely, you're going to get divided government. The thought that the Democrats will sweep and win all positions seems unlikely. Republicans seem also unlikely. And so we're going to be right back where we started 2 Januaries ago, where these parties that have been fighting with one another are going to have to figure out a way to work together. The House of Representatives, which has been especially dysfunctional, you saw the efforts to elect a Speaker of the House. Mr. McCarthy couldn't get there for the longest time, and then eventually he got there, and then he was later kicked out of the seat for doing responsible things like helping Congress pass a budget. We may see some more of that. It's possible, but I'm also hoping that some of the people who were involved in those shenanigans have maybe learned a little bit, that their long-term goals are not going to be well served by trying to torch the place.
Kevin Kosar, thanks so much.